as we sit back and talk about MAGA and we sit back and talk about all the shenanigans that Donald Trump is doing, we fail to look at the things that really matter, the things that he said he's going to do and how it's going to affect us in the aggregate. And funny, what he did with China by imposing those tariffs close to when he left the left the presidency, we have to realize that what that had to do with inflation. Putting tariffs on China isn't hurting China per se. It is hurting the American people because tariffs on any product is passed on as a tax directly to a person. If you buy a refrigerator and from China, then guess what? Tariffs is placed on it. That refrigerator increases in price by that tariff because you know who never takes a loss. And that is, of course, the plutocracy. Our executives never take a loss. They raise prices whenever prices are raised on them, plus more. So let's be clear here. Whenever Trump talks about tariff, that's what he's talking about. Now, again, he's talking about imposing a 10% tariff coming from China because he's going to stick it to China. What he doesn't really tell you is that it's a tariff that, well, I tell you what, let's listen to this and then we'll take it on the other side.
There's one thing that truly unites all Americans. It's that everyone hates paying more for stuff. That is why, when inflation sent the price of everyday goods soaring in the wake of the pandemic, you saw it reflected in poll after poll after poll. People's view of the economy plummeted. So did their approval of the president. In fact, this happened basically across the Western world. It was everyone's first taste of real sharp inflation in a generation. And guess what? People really hated it, which is, of course, completely understandable because, well, it really, really sucked. In 2020, your average family of four paid about $927 a month for groceries. At the height of inflation in 2022, the average was $1,307 a month. That's $400 more a month. Now, that has started to come down, actually, in real terms. The average at the end of last year was around $1,261, but again, still up from 2020. And the experience of paying more and more and feeling like prices are out of control and feeling squeezed translates to disaffection. And that disaffection is probably the single biggest advantage you can have as, say, the challenger to an incumbent president operating in a world in which prices have gone up. And yet, the Republican challenger, President Biden, isn't running on lowering prices. He's actually running on jacking up prices on a huge amount of the goods we use every day. And I know it sounds like I'm making this up, but genuinely, and I want to be clear here, his core economic policy proposal right now is an across-the-board consumer sales tax for every single good imported into the United States. Now, he may call it a tariff, but it will just be passed along to consumers in a sales tax on every single good that is imported. And again, you do not need to take my word for it. Just listen to Donald Trump himself.
Number one, I think we should have a ring around the collar, as they say. I think when companies come in and they dump their products in the United States, they should pay automatically, let's say, a 10% tax.
I'm a big believer in tariffs for two reasons. Number one, I fully believe in them economically when you're being taken advantage of by other countries. I would say to China, if you're building a plant on our border to build cars in Mexico and to sell them into the United States, I'm putting a 50% tariff on all those cars.
You used tariffs and sanctions against China.
I did, and I did very well with it. As you know, we took in hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes through the taxes and tariffs.
Is that what you want to do again?
Well, you have to do it.
Okay, if you are a single issue inflation voter, there is only one candidate who wants to put a 10% tax that will be passed along to consumers as a sales tax on every single good that's imported. And here's the thing, this is not a hypothetical. Trump did a miniature version of this the last time he was president when he put tariffs on different Chinese goods. Here's how that worked out. According to analysis by the New York Fed, the average import tariff rate more than doubled in 2018 alone. It tangibly led to higher domestic consumer prices. Take the first two tariffs on washing machines and steel. Economists found that consumer prices for washing machines, which have been going down steadily since 2012, almost immediately jumped back up after Trump's tariffs. In fact, the New York Times found that the washer-specific tariffs raised costs for importers like LG and Samsung. The steel import tariffs raised costs for some domestic manufacturers like Whirlpool, pushing prices up for consumers. Now Trump wants to do it again, but bigger, okay? Now, you can argue this is going to, in the long run, help American manufacturing. There's some argument on the other side of it. But in the short term, like what's going to happen is the prices are going to go up. The Democratic Aligned Center for American Progress found that Trump's proposed new tariffs would cost typical households an extra $1,500 per year. Here's what that might look like. Trump is proposing a 10% tariff. If that 10% gets passed on to consumers, which is generally how it works, things will cost more. Now, we don't know exactly how much everything would cost, but you just add 10% on the back of the napkin. Here's the cost of living under the Trump tax. Start with groceries, which has been the site of a lot of angst, right? A dozen eggs costs about $3. Once you apply the Trump tax, that goes up to $3.30. And with the U.S. importing more than 4 million eggs a year, that could cost American consumers over $1.2 million. If you like oranges, those currently go for about $1.53 per pound. With the 10% Trump tax, it would be $1.68 per pound, which would cost American consumers almost $71 million for the nearly 500 million pounds that we import. Or how about bananas? We don't really grow them in the U.S., do we? They average about 63 cents per pound, going up to 69 cents per pound with the Trump tax. And thanks to the U.S. importing more than 10 billion with a B pounds per year, that could cost Americans $609 million. That's a $609 million tax on American consumers. Then there's tomatoes. They go for about $2.13 per pound. Apply a 10% Trump tax. They would be $2.34 per pound, potentially costing Americans $3.5 million, thanks to the 16.5 million pounds we import per year. The point is, if you were spending $1,200 a month on groceries, add another $120 to the bill. That's more than even the peak of inflation in 2022, which topped off at 9%. This is 10%, okay? And it's not just groceries. How about the refrigerator? You need to keep those groceries fresh. Right now, the average cost of a new fridge is about $1,300. With the Trump tax, that could go up to $1,430, costing Americans $1.95 billion for the 15 million refrigerators that we import. Again, that's a $1.95 billion in new taxes. What about the car you need to drive to the grocery store? On average, a new car costs about $48,808 today. With a Trump tax, it could cost $53,684, with Americans potentially taking a $66.3 billion hit across the more than 13 million cars we import. And that's not even with the 50% tariff that he says he wants to slap on imported cars, which would make it another $25,000. Even the smartphone in your pocket costs on average about $940 right now. With the Trump tax, that could go up to $1,034, with Americans potentially paying an extra $13.2 billion for the nearly 141 million smartphones we import per year. Everyone hates when you have to pay more for things. Inflation is one of the biggest vulnerabilities for a sitting president. And yet, here's Donald Trump in the year of our Lord, 2024, running against President Biden, promising to make things more expensive for every American.
What Trump doesn't tell you, in addition to that 10% tariff that he is intending on impose on China, so that you will eventually have your taxes raised by 10% based on what you purchase. What he doesn't tell you is, again, who is that tax going to? They impose a tax on China. You, the American people, actually pay the tax on the product, because it's not China paying the tax. It's the person who buys the product from China who pays the tax. And who gets that money? The federal government. And what does Trump want to do when he comes into office? Give a big tax cut to corporations and the wealthy again. So in effect, this tariff is going to be used to take your money and put it into the pockets of rich people yet again, above and beyond the $1.something trillion he gave them. People, understand the dynamics. Understand it. He's going to be taking taxes in the form of tariffs from you. China doesn't pay the tariffs. You pay the tariff, because when the corporations import from China, a tariffs have applied to them. They pay that tariff not to China, but as a tax to the United States government. And when the United States government get that tax, who do you think is paying the corporations to pay that tax? You are with the inflated prices that's going to be going on refrigerators, etc. And then they can give that tax cut to the wealthy people, because guess who's not going to get it? You're not. Remember, we have experience with that. It's not like this guy wasn't president before. He was the president before, and most of his tax cut went exactly where we said it would go. And that is to a whole bunch of rich people. Again, do you want to continue being a sucker of somebody who doesn't have much upstairs other than some form to take your money, to take you to the cleaners, to lie to you, to do the things to you that no one else you would allow them to do to you? Folks, wake up and vote accordingly.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.